There is one thing about art that I think is very central, and that is the notion of performativity. And of course my generation and probably longer, art has been very much about going from a solidified object into a web or into a net of social relations or different ideas about performativity. So maybe it has become less about what is art, but more about what does art do to the world, or what does the world do to the art, and what type of relationship is that. And in that relationship, obviously, the way we perceive or experience or take in art, or the way we produce and constitute and sort of perform art, has become very central as the one that actually is the artistic potential. And this is why I, of course, have over the years increasingly been looking at the role of the body. Obviously, it's not just about how does the body move and do things, but it becomes more about how does the body in fact orient itself within the context of other material or other situations. So I'm very interested in this idea of a compass, not as an object, but more the compass as a way for us to see ourselves in the context of a grid, of a plan. So you know suddenly which way you're turning, and knowing which way you're turning, you're also in a situation where you can tell where is that distant point there, where is that distant point there, and your frame of reference becomes conceptually at least much bigger. And suddenly you are a part of a system, and you can talk about, well, I'm moving my body, and within the context of the system I can talk about friction. So suddenly I'm not autonomous, I'm not pretending to be alone, but I'm actually in some frictional relationship. This is now, for me, about art. I know little about dance, but I'm very interested in the type of movements within choreographic thinking, which is about exposing or making explicit this feeling of friction as a way of constituting the space. Suddenly you are, in fact, not trying to pretend that it's a little unfair for ballet, but in a way, I'm not pretending to be weightless, but I'm pretending to be heavy. So I've been looking at, the sort of performativity of, do you call it miming and street theater or breakdance, and this idea of, that we're pretending that, or we are making this space explicit, right? I'm doing the window, right? I'm sort of showing that I walk into something, I'm underwater, and with or without the kind of limitations that also has, it's very interesting for me to show where the body is not really the subject. The body becomes more like let's say a producer or a kind of performer, and this is where I then start to consider how I can make a work of art. If you have sunlight, or if you have a lamp, right? A lamp on you, then you have a shadow. So you have a lamp here, and my body is here, and then there is a shadow maybe on the wall. This situation is very clear, we all know it. You see your own shadow, easy. Then you realize that if you move your arm, the shadow changes, also very easy. But if the light is of a certain quality, and the space supports that, and the shadow and the body and the space and the light seems to be in some kind of contract, the quality of the experience might be so that your shadow promotes this idea of, whoa, that looks actually interesting, or it has a degree of, let's say, feedback where I say, wow, maybe I should move my other arm too. Had I not seen the shadow, I probably would not have started that. And then you start to, let's say, dance, not because you want to make your shadow move, but because your shadow makes your body move. Suddenly it turns around the kind of contract on who's doing what to who, meaning that you are in a situation where the shadow becomes the subject and you become the object. So you see yourself from the point of view of the space. And this, I think, is interesting because we are suddenly seeing ourselves within the context of a system where we are co-producing. We're not egoistically, creating. We are the created part. We can take that into a more traditional and larger experiments where you can talk about the sequence of walking through exhibitions, this sort of narrative of expectations and memory, what is coming and what is coming and what has been, and how that timeline creates a kind of a build-up of a narrative with a suspense and so on and so forth. So which is obviously something that choreographic thinking has more knowledge of. But the point here is, if we successfully can bring it, in my case, as an artist, if we can successfully bring it to the viewer to understand that it is the walking, the moving, the dancing if you want, that is the protagonist for the narrative. The narrative is representational, has no body without you moving through it. So who's the author here? I can write a narrative, but I cannot make the body of the viewer go through that space. Right? So the narrative has a representational, it's thought, it's an idea, but the physical, in German you would say Erfahrung, the experienced narrative is the movement or the choreography of the person who moves through the exhibition. You can make that explicit by, like I did the round rainbow on the top of the museum in Denmark, Aros. It's a map of color. If you don't move, you won't see anything. Right, so what is the seeing here? Is it with your eyes, or is it the movement? And obviously movement is a little more complex, because movement is both your kind of physical activity and your knowledge about it, but it is also the temporal hospitality in which the body takes space or moves. So I'm very interested in how the physical, the Erfahrung, the sort of experiential, temporal component becomes the producer or the author of an exhibition. So as an artist, I can create the setup. But if you don't go through the show, and if I don't succeed bringing people to the sort of the point of awareness where they realize, wow, my physical presence is the one that actually creates the show. I am responsible. I am the one who constitutes the art I'm seeing. By using the body, by using the choreography, and the confidence in the viewer, by handing it over to them, I also give them the responsibility. This is where I think the person feels that I trust them. And there's something there which is, I think, really interesting, because it doesn't really happen that often. Because everybody always wants to take ownership for everything in a very egoistic way, and nobody really trusts anybody else to become the producer of reality. This is where choreography is something for me which is more about trust, and about also confidence in other people and interdependence. I was showing the project Little Sun at the Tate Modern, and the project Little Sun is about energy, and I'm not going to talk too much about that, but essentially it's a solar-powered handheld affordable little lantern. That is to be used primarily in off-grid areas, off-grid meaning in places where there's no electricity. So I did a project which was really trying to twist this notion of what does it feel like to actually hold energy or to be energy. What does it feel like to shed light on yourself? How do you become, again, the exposed part? The light graffiti was essentially a camera like very much like the one I'm looking at now, and then I have a lamp and I would have a screen and people would be looking at the screen and then they could make a drawing with the little sun and they could see the drawing on the screen. The point is, you suddenly realize that the light in your hand became also a way to illuminate the space, and you have become the power station yourself. So the light graffiti was very much about storing the experience in the choreographic idea of a graffiti, like a tag. And you would suddenly have a situation where people, they would say, what is this about? Then they would do a drawing, and then I say, well, maybe I still don't know exactly what to say with regards to what it's about, but I know how it feels. And that is an interesting experience to take with you. It's not just how it feels, it's a felt feeling. You are aware that you have a feeling of what does it mean to hold power in your hand. And as we all know, having power is very liberating, in the sense that we are suddenly now in a situation where we become the source of energy, and we are not the dependent part and source of energy. So in this case, you could say choreography or movement and drawing, becoming an artist if you want, creating something, that became where the kind of the hinge where the body and the idea contracted and the memory took on a different experiential potential. And suddenly I could see people leaving, having a relationship to off-grid areas in a much more emotional, if you talk about responsibility, in a more contagious kind of way.